The evening sun dripped across the raw sky like molten gold, and at that very moment Harvey Roque, the 30-year-old lonely rancher, walked slowly along the dust-choked path toward the final field of the slave auction. The red dust swirled around his boots like long-forgotten memories rising from the earth, and the air carried a feeling that tugged at the heart, a quiet unease he could not name. Harvey did not fully understand why he had come, perhaps drawn by a silent desire to interrupt the monotony of solitude, or perhaps he was simply searching for a moment that could hold life steady before it scattered again. On the platform stood a young girl, barely 20, her wrists bound with ropes, Najoni. Dust had tangled in her long black hair, as though unfinished sentences of a story clung to her. Her eyes shone with a strange light, not fear, not defeat, but a stillness that drew people toward it. When Harvey's gaze met hers, the air seemed to pause, yet the pause suggested some subtle turning, as if silence itself had a secret to reveal. The auction continued. Voices rose like stones tossed into air. Numbers shouted as though she were not a human being, but an object with no breath, no suffering, no dignity. Harvey shifted his weight uneasily, his throat tightening with a mixture of anger and helplessness. Memories of his mother surfaced. The gentle hands that healed anyone's wounds, the voice that had always said a person's worth could not be measured by the world's crude scales. These memories pressed against him until a dormant courage began to stir. The auctioneer called another number. A man in a stained vest raised his hand eagerly, another elbowed forward, amused by the spectacle. Harvey felt as if the land beneath his boots whispered that it was time to act. Curiosity prickled through him, not the distant kind, but the one that appears at the crossroads demanding a step. Before he could stop himself, his voice rose above the din, steady and low, trembling only at the edges, and he placed the bid that silenced all other voices. The gavel fell with finality that made Harvey flinch, though no one could see it. All eyes swung toward him, some curious, some mocking, some questioning. He felt exposed, yet he did not regret his choice. The crowd parted as Najoni was led toward him, the rope still around her wrists like an accusation neither of them deserved. When she reached him, her expression carried a mixture of caution and reluctant relief, as if preparing for disappointment before it could arrive. Harvey lifted his hand slowly so she could see every motion, and with a small knife, he cut the rope. It fell to the dirt with a muted slap, leaving behind only the raw marks on her wrists. He wished he could erase those as easily. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met again, and the air trembled with a delicate, uncertain, undeniable pulse. Behind them, the crowd dispersed. The spectacle had ended, leaving a quiet between them that felt like a question with no answer. "Act like you're mine, and come with me," he said softly, not to claim her, but to shield her from the prying eyes that still lurked at the edges of the field. The words sounded foreign in his mouth as if borrowed from a braver man. Najoni hesitated, her breath catching slightly, and Harvey feared she would refuse, the only fragile protection he could offer. But then she nodded slowly as if agreeing to a truce neither of them yet understood. He guided her to his horse, careful to give her space, letting her choose each step. The red marks of the rope glowed faintly in the fading sunlight, and a quiet anger stirred inside him, steady, restrained, like the low rumble of an approaching storm. When she climbed the saddle, her hands firm yet tense, he felt a responsibility he had never carried before. As they left the auction field, the sky bruised violet, the vast land around them stretched with the weight of silence and uncertainty. Their journey was slow. The sound of the horses' hooves struck the ground in rhythmic accompaniment to the tension between them. Harvey walked beside the horse, reins in hand, close enough to guide, far enough to let her feel free. The sky deepened from gold to cobalt, clouds stretching like fading brushstrokes. Najoni glanced at the passing landscape with careful attentiveness, mapping distances, tracing escape routes, judging whether Harvey could be trusted. He did not blame her. Trust, he knew, is not born in a single moment. It is shaped over countless small, deliberate choices. Occasionally her eyes flicked toward him, curiosity and wariness mingled, and each glance made a subtle wave of relief course through him. When the silhouette of his ranch appeared under the rising moon, she drew in a quiet breath. He could not tell if it was relief, anticipation, or a mixture of both. Inside the house, the scent of cedar smoke and old firewood lingered, a fragrance that had comforted Harvey in the past but now felt weighted with the unspoken. He placed a blanket on a chair, not on her shoulders, offering warmth without assumption. A cup of water followed and he stepped back, letting the room belong to her first. Najoni moved slowly, tracing her fingers over carved wooden figures on the mantel. Horses, birds, a few delicate flowers. Her attention lingered longer than expected, and Harvey noticed a slight softening in her posture. He observed from a distance, protective yet uncertain. He wanted to ask her name, but sensed that forcing words could shatter the fragile truce they had built. When she finally spoke, barely above a whisper, "My name is Najoni," the night seemed to exhale, acknowledging a truth shared willingly. As the fire dwindled to embers, Harvey quietly told her why he had stepped forward at the auction. He offered no excuses, only truth, that he could not stand by while the world sought to break another person, that he understood isolation if not her kind. Najoni listened without interruption, expression unreadable yet not dismissive. For a moment Harvey feared he had crossed a line, but then she moved slightly closer to the fire, grounding herself in the warmth as though accepting the space he had created. She revealed fragments of her story, the pressure to accept a marriage she did not want, the exile that followed, the journey that led her into the hands of men who saw profit instead of personhood. Her voice was calm, yet her eyes revealed the exhaustion of a spirit tested beyond measure. A thin, tentative thread of understanding stretched between them, fragile but real. They spent the night in the hush of muted hours. Harvey offered her the bedroom, his voice gentle, insisting that he would sleep by the fire. She paused at the doorway, touching the frame lightly, testing the reality of the moment. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, subtle yet profound. Harvey settled on the floor nearby, watching the dying embers, and wondered if he had altered her life or simply led her into another unknown. But before sleep claimed him, he sensed a fragile promise had taken root, something patient, something unhurried. Morning brought a quiet revelation, and a weight of possibility pressed over them like dew on prairie grass. Over the following days Najoni stayed close, helping around the house, moving with soft dignity, and Harvey often found himself startled by her strength, her grace. He saw the resilience in her hands, the way her presence filled empty spaces. And slowly, silently, the two began to understand each other, not in words but in gestures, glances, the mutual rhythm of shared solitude. One evening, as spring winds stirred the ranch's open spaces, Harvey said quietly while offering 2 cups of warm tea, "If you wish, we can make this official. A bond of protection, respect, maybe even trust." Najoni's eyes widened only slightly, a small flicker of hesitation. Then softly she asked, "Is this just pity?" The question pierced Harvey like an arrow. "No, it's not pity. Perhaps it is a part of the heart I've kept locked for years, and you have quietly opened it." Silence followed, profound, and both felt the unspoken acknowledgement that destiny, or some tender chance, was quietly shaping their lives. 2 days later, beneath a modest church ceiling, the scent of wildflowers drifting softly through the air, Najoni entered with tentative steps. Harvey stood before her, a shy half-smile on his lips, as though he could hardly believe that this quiet, steady companion was finally beside him. The preacher spoke in soft words, but the room seemed to hold its breath as Harvey took her hand. Her fingers trembled, but not with fear, this time with the weight and wonder of a new beginning. Najoni lowered her head, and a single tear slid down her cheek, once shed from pain, now glimmering with hope. As they exited the church, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and fresh rain. Najoni looked fully at Harvey for the first time and smiled faintly, a small, powerful smile that seemed capable of shifting the world. Yet beneath this warmth lingered a shadow of uncertainty, a reminder that even joy held its edges in tension, that life's trials were far from over. That night, seated by the flickering lantern in the yard, Harvey said softly, "Sometimes, life brings us to places we cannot yet understand. We may not know if we are being saved or changed, but we are not alone." Najoni nodded, whispering, "In my people's stories, when 2 wounds mend together, they heal faster than one ever could alone." They sat together for a long time, listening to the rain tapping on the roof, feeling a deep, almost sacred calm settle around them. And though the night was still, a soft current of anticipation lingered, a reminder that the story was not yet fully told, that their roots were only beginning to entwine. And if you ever wander the evening paths of Sand Creek, perhaps you will glimpse that same gentle lantern light swaying, as if an old story is still breathing, still waiting to remind those who watch that the deepest wounds sometimes require the presence of another to truly heal, and that love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is understood in the quiet of simply being together. And perhaps, dear friend, that is the most beautiful truth of life. The heart often settles exactly where it first finds a shadow that feels like home, and a name that belongs only to it.